Καλημέρα σας. Λέγομαι Δημήτρης Papalexopoulos, είμαι πρόεδρος του Συνδέσμου Επιχειρήσεων και Βιομηχανιών του ΣΕΒ και πρόεδρος της TCI, της Titan Cement International. Έχουμε μαζί μας σήμερα, καλωσορίζουμε τον Γεράσιμο Θωμά, που πολλοί από εμάς τον γνωρίζουμε από την πρόσφατη θητεία του ως Υφυπουργό Ενέργειας, αλλά είναι εδώ σήμερα μαζί μας με την επίσημη ιδιότητά του ως Γενικός Διευθυντής Επιφορολογικών Θεμάτων στη DG Taxation and Customs Union στις Βρυξέλλες. Και γι' αυτό θα μας επιτρέψετε στο πνεύμα της εποχής να κάνουμε αυτή τη συζήτηση στα αγγλικά, διότι αφορά τα ευρωπαϊκά δεδομένα. The question we will try and address today in the next 20 minutes or so is a very simple one, but a very difficult one. How can we square Europe's climate ambitions with its industrial competitiveness? It's an issue that recently seems more and more difficult, it's like squaring the circle. So let me set the stage before asking a few questions to Gerassimos. The European Union has set a goal for Europe to become the first carbon-neutral continent by 2050, a goal which I think we all, both as citizens and as business people, wholeheartedly support. And in that context, it has created a series of laws. It has created a holistic, integrated framework to help guide, to create the stable framework that's necessary for companies to make the huge-scale investments that are necessary to make this transition happen. In that context is also the Fit for 55, which are the goals that the ambitious goals that the European Union has set itself for 2030. At the heart, at the core of that, is putting a price on carbon emissions. Today, that price is at a not insignificant 90 to 100 euros per ton, and that provides the basis for the whole concept. Now, since Fit for 55 was launched a couple of years ago, better for worse mostly, things have changed considerably. Last year, we had an explosion of energy prices, which went up 5 to 10 times. And we had, for the first time, huge changes in production ratios. Give you some examples. In the chemicals industry, 2022 was the first year since records have been kept in a century where there were more imports than exports of chemicals. In aluminium, where 3 years ago, Europe was mostly self-sufficient. Almost half of our needs were imported in 2022. If you talk about other materials, cement, steel, fertilizers, the numbers are maybe not exactly the same, but equally worrying. And despite the fact that in early 2023, we have returned to a kind of normalcy, energy prices remain quite elevated, and more importantly, it seems that Europe has a structural energy cost disadvantage that will last several years. No matter how quickly we move to green energy, this structural disadvantage is not going to disappear for several years. And then there are problems added to that. America launched last year the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, which basically says something like, we as the US cannot politically put a price on carbon, so we cannot have a whip to whip everything to shape. Instead, we will offer huge carrots, huge incentives. And they have created a series of incentives that are very good for the planet because they bring closer the possibility that America will accelerate its green transition, but they create an even more uneven playing field with Europe. And coming in addition to that, in 2026, according to Fit for 55 and the European Union's plan, we're getting to the point where the remaining free allocations of CO2 emission rights to industry will start being withdrawn. And at that point, we will have to pay for all our emission rights at full price. So you put all that together, and a lot of people are talking about an existential crisis of energy-intensive industry in Europe. And although that's not yet visible in the results, because you can still make money importing, the reality is that most big companies are no longer investing in Europe in those sectors. They're investing elsewhere. And the risk of energy leakage and carbon leakage, i.e. production leaving Europe and being substituted by imports, is becoming more and more real. And the problem is not only that Europe will lose jobs and vitality, we're not doing any good for the environment either, because it's the same products mostly being imported, often with less stringent environmental conditions. So that is the difficult setup. So how can we combine climate ambition on one hand, which we have to do something about and even accelerate, without destroying our industrial competitiveness? So with that pleasant introduction, Gerassimos, what is your assessment of the current state of play for Fit for 55 or more generally?
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Kalimera se όλους. I think you set the stage very well, and I think we have to handle this very carefully. I mean, we are 1 week after the Council and the European Parliament adopted the Fit for 55 and all its components, including the ETS reform and CBAM into law. So it is now European law, all these components of Fit for 55. I would make a few points in response to your introductory remarks. First, that industrial competitiveness is green competitiveness. And new energy is green energy, because green energy will be cheaper. So there is no conflict between competitiveness and the Green Deal. The future is green, and this is both in Europe, this is in China, this is in the US, this is in Canada, this is in Australia. Everybody's changing. Second, Europe and our economic paradigm. International trade is good for Europe. We need the world more than they need us. International growth is good for Europe. And EU regulation is the instrument that we have at our hands in order to do these things. So we need the Green Deal. We need to successfully implement it. And there is, since the war, there is the new concept that it is entering our economic paradigm. It is the notion of economic security. Economic security is not economic nationalization or so. Economic security, this is a new element on which we didn't pay enough attention in the past, and we need to carefully go about this. That's why I had the Critical Material Act or so. So we need to pay some attention to this. I think carbon leakage, we think that we set a policy with CBAM by which we will give the example, and as with free allowances, we had dealt with carbon leakage in the past in a quite efficient way, but with the risks on the WTO front, we had almost trade wars because of that on steel or so. So with CBAM, we have an instrument and a tool that we are developing together with industry in order to come to an equally good result for our industry.
We can come back to the IRA and the Zero Industry Act later. Let's focus on CBAM, because I think it is also the core of your work currently in Brussels. When I talk to industrialists around Europe, CBAM gets a very mixed review. Most people recognize that we cannot live without it in a situation where we have to buy all our emission rights. Many of the energy-intensive industries would be dead without it. However, at the same time, there's a number of issues that make a lot of people say, we don't want it, a lot of industries. And that has to do with, for example, its inability to deal with exports, the way the WTO compatibility argument works. It has to do with the risk of bureaucracy. It has to do with the fact that somehow it's easy to see how countries that want to go around it can find ways around it, at least partially. So how do you think we can make the CBAM work? And more importantly, what are the safeguards as we develop those solutions?
Yeah, that's important. Unfortunately, you cannot get rid of it. So we are the best thing that you have in an unstable world, and I think it's well designed. I mean, first, we proposed CBAM in July 2021 with industry together, and in fact we heard from the industry and the request from the industry not to include indirect emissions in the last quarter. We were ready to do it, and because of the industry, we didn't include it. And I think what the Council and the Parliament adopted, it's 90% of what we proposed, so it is, shows that we were quite picturing it right. I think what is important is that CBAM does not enter into force until 2026. And this partnership with industry has to continue. We have to work with the cement sector, the aluminum sector, the steel sector, to work together in the next 3 years, 2.5, 3 years, to make sure that we calibrate it appropriately. And after 2026, we have another 3 years. The phasing out of free allowances is very gradual until 2028. Only 10% will go out. So we have this period that was my only red line in negotiations is do not start early. We try to do something that it is quite difficult. It is addressed to foreign companies. All the administrative burden is to these companies based in Turkey, in Ukraine, in Egypt, in South Korea. This is for them. It's from them that they complain more than you on the burden. So, and we try to have a new framework by which we calculate the CO2 embedded in products. You are all familiar with ETS. You have the self-certification of your plants. Here we talk about products. How much CO2 in this ton of aluminium coming to our borders? And I deal with this because it's a border thing. So we will have a public consultation in June about the methodology to calculate the carbon content, and we want the industry, both domestic and outside, to comment on it. We will come with the new reporting requirements at the end of July. The reporting will be done for the last quarter of this year, so in January we will report on the last quarter. We do have to, I pay a lot of attention not to have high administrative burden. But where I want the European industry is that they come with us and work with us to tell us if what we get reported is solid enough, good enough, to finalize the methodology in 2025. We are open about it in our expert groups. The industry is present in all our meetings, all the methodologies that we do, the industry is there, as are third countries and the civil society. So we have work to do. You know, you have the knowledge of the plant and what you face in the reality there. We don't have. We have a small team. So you need to work with us. It's more useful to work with us than against us, at least at this stage.
That is a good principle. You didn't mention anything about exports. For those of us who still hope to be able to export from Europe, any hope?
Well, we have taken a commitment to look at the impact of this transition period on exports, and we will make a report to Council and Parliament. The problem with export is WTO compatibility. And is WTO compatibility important? I like to say it depends on how much trade dispute appetite you have. It's a matter of risk appetite. So if you want to have a lot of trade wars and a lot of WTO disputes, you can take a lot of WTO risk. I think at the moment, the president, our president has made a very good agreement with the Biden administration on GSA. As you know, we have not any particular tension in our trade relationships with the US. We are working very much now with the US. We are negotiating because the methodological issues of carbon content are very close to this GSA discussions that we have. There will be an agreement with the US in October. It's very delicate, because the US wants to exclude China. We don't want to exclude China. So we have time by 2025 to look with serenity and objectively on what is happening with exports. And if there is something we can do, I promise you we will do it. And we have made the commitment to the Parliament and to you.
We're hoping to have that same serenity. We don't have it yet.
In IRA, I mean, you keep talking about these billions that the Americans are giving to the industry. We give 172 billion per year. Whatever you do, EU level, member states level, we give more subsidies. So the money is not the only solution to the problems, throwing more money. But nevertheless, we do give a lot of money, a lot of state aid, a huge innovation fund, 40 million allowances specific for the CBAM sectors to finance innovation. I hear a lot of positive signals here in Delphi about moving to innovative solutions, carbon storage, a lot of renewable projects here. That is the future. We need to move fast, and Europe will be there to help you. Bigger modernization fund, bigger innovation fund, ring fencing for CBAM. There will be a lot, but we need to not have any inertia to change. There will be a lot of change ahead of us.
One last question before we summarize. Europe is only 7% of global emissions, and the whole point is not just for Europe to succeed, the world must succeed, otherwise we've done nothing. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more difficult for the world to cooperate on climate for a number of reasons. Is there anything that Europe can do to accelerate that global diplomacy that will also help preserve competitiveness?
You are correct. I mean, our policy is that we need to lead by example, and we need to have the technologies which we will export, for this. But we have a tough time. We have the world is not a G7 world anymore. G20, we have an Indian presidency this year, a Brazilian presidency the year after, and the South African presidency in 2025. That's the people that I talk to, and believe me, they are more difficult than you are. And we have a COP run by Egypt last year, with the United Arab Emirates next year. So we need to keep fighting, and we need to work with the industry to be the most in the forefront of green technology. Everybody will become green. It's not only us who have committed to decarbonization, everybody, but we need to be green and keep the niche high value added in industry, and we will help. Europe will help. We need, the last comment, action by each member state is not the same as EU action. So we need to put our differences aside and act as EU.
Thank you very much. What I hear is two messages I get from this. A hand of cooperation and discussion, which we absolutely need by 2025. And the second message I get is we have to train ourselves as industry to be more difficult than the Brazilians and the Indians, otherwise our goose is cooked. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.